This is the second part of the video on broken hearts. So previously the video was cut off because I'm not skilled with video editing and don't know how to marry the broken video with the previous video that was recorded. If I do figure out a way to do that, then of course I will include it. So where I left off was talking about the middle child. The middle child, just to rehash some of that, within the family, there's the oldest child who typically, unless something happens within the family, something to alter the framework of the family, the oldest child typically will take on, embody the characteristics of the parents. They will seek to be successful in socially acceptable ways. They will usually have a lot of control issues, but that type A personality, the person who's geared towards material success. So that's typically your oldest child personality type. Because that role is taken, then the middle child of the family, it's often the middle child, will then become the rebel or the child who's different from the family. And how I try to explain it is that there is a sense within the family of the subconsciousness of the family. And I have another video that speaks to that, but there's just like there's the subconsciousness of the human experience, there's also the subconsciousness of the family. The family itself is a larger embodiment of the same kind of theories around psychology for the individual. So just like you have a consciousness and a subconsciousness within the individual, you have a consciousness and a subconsciousness within the family. The rebel child will be different than the oldest child typically, and then in a 3-child family, the youngest child would then most likely be kind of like the goofy child, the child who's always joking, the child who is the jokester, is the easygoing one. And often their spouses have issues with them because they say, I really need you to be more present. I really need you to take these concerns more seriously. And it's difficult, I think, sometimes, like in my particular family, my younger sibling has more of an oldest child personality type, has a more assertive, ambitious personality type. I think it's challenging in those cases because that role is taken. The oldest child role is taken, and then a younger child then is kind of left with whatever role is left over. And so they don't necessarily have access to being given that role as one of their options. They kind of have to sift through what are the other options. And within that is the child who's the barometer of the family. They can be the rebel or the identified patient. But if you think about the family as being a microcosm or a macrocosm of the individual, then within that framework, the subconsciousness of the family, it needs to manifest in some way. So for the individual, our subconscious might manifest in our dreams, right? We might have a dream where we are in love with our boss and we didn't realize that we had feelings about our boss, and we have to examine those. Maybe we see a therapist and we're talking and we say, oh, I had a dream and it was a sexual dream and I was really just perplexed. Like, why would I have this dream about my boss, right? And the therapist might say, I wonder if you might have feelings, that you haven't really confronted, or can you dig deep and think about, do you have some attraction to your boss, right? So it's interesting to think about that within the family, because what happens is certain children, I think certain people are more susceptible to noticing discrepancies. So they look around at life and they're being raised as a child, and you're being given all these books, right? Books or ideas or knowledge about truth, right? Truth and lies and what's real and what's not, right? An atheist might say, well, we don't have any, proof of God. And religious people might say, oh no, we have proof of God, right? But those are almost like a subjective viewpoint, right? That's not necessarily right or wrong. It's more of a subjective viewpoint. The child who is the questioner, the child who is caught up in noticing these things, at some point, they usually have a breaking point, right? They realize, like, I've been told my whole life that truth matters, right? Like when you're your parent is standing above you and yelling at you for cheating on a test at school or stealing out of your mother's purse or something along those lines, you're being told, right? What you're told is the truth matters. Please tell me the truth. I need you to not lie, right? Did you take a drug? Did you not take a drug? Did you steal from me or not steal from me, right? So we're told like truth really matters, right? And even as children, we're told truth really matters. And I think what happens for those people that end up being the identified patient or the rebel child or what have you, is that they sometimes can be the most vulnerable to being one of those people who recognize society is not consistent in this, right? We're told that truth matters, we're told to tell the truth, but that particular child might realize like, well, my mom says to tell the truth, but my mom's not happy, right? My mom, I observe her every day and she hates her life, or she hates my dad, or she hates her career, or she is just kind of waiting to die. She's living the same day, day after day, the same day, the same life, year after year, the same life, waiting to die, right? So that's not really living, right? And so many people are just living these the same life, each year and waiting to die. So I think the person who is sensitive to that, they sometimes look around and they say, wow, you're telling me truth matters, but you're not telling the truth. You're not telling dad the truth. You're not telling yourself the truth. You're not telling us the truth. You're living a lie. You're not a happy person. You say to your friends you're happy when the grocery store clerk rings up your groceries and says, how are you, for the millionth time that day. You don't say to the grocery clerk, I'm angry, or I'm sad, or I'm depressed, or these aren't moments of honesty, right? We aren't cultivating moments of honesty in our society. We avoid honesty, we avoid conflict. It's unfortunate, but we do. So it's really difficult for those people who are very sensitive to discrepancy, to you tell me one thing but you do another, and it's similar to in psychology when they call it the double bind, which is like the schizophrenic mother who says, Tommy, come here, mommy's got some love for you, and then little Tommy like runs up to get some love from his mom, and then his mom like says something horrible like, you're such a jerk and you're no good, and you're such a bad, I never should have had you. The child doesn't know what to expect, and the child is given mixed messages like, I'm going to receive love, I come to you to receive love, and then what I'm receiving is mental illness, right? Or punishment that's random and I don't know when it will happen. And I think that's the double bind of our culture, is that we tell people, we preach in a sense, that telling the truth matters so much that there's a definitive difference between truth and a lie, that there's a definitive difference between facts and non-facts. And so what ends up happening is the sensitive child would then question that, right? And they almost don't have the words for it, right? They might just act it out through pain and suffering, through drug addiction or confusion, because nothing makes sense anymore, right? Like, it doesn't make sense that people tell us we're happy, you're the problem, right? Because there's almost like not even the opportunity to say back to everyone, what if I'm okay and everyone else is messed up? What if I'm okay and you guys are the ones that are actually deeply disturbed because you're pretending to be happy? You're putting so much energy into pretending to be happy, but you're not happy. And yeah, I'm the fuck up child. I steal, or I do drugs, or I, cost my family so much money, right? But the sense of what that means to your own mental health, to understand that people are lying, but they may not even realize that they're lying. So there's a strong concern for, what do we believe is the truth? And we don't always know what the truth is, but I think where we are weak as a human species is that we we tell ourselves that the truth is something that's fairly easily discernible, and that's not always the case. The truth is not always easily discernible, and truth, I would argue, has shades of gray to it. It's not as black and white as we like to pretend as a culture. But in this particular instance, truth matters because there's something that I would call soul truth, which is when it resonates with your soul or it doesn't. So an example of that would be when you know something doesn't feel right, you don't necessarily need to know what the facts are. You just can kind of trust yourself. You know it doesn't feel right. You know in your gut it does not feel right, and you know that it doesn't like smell of the truth, right? And that's more of like an intuitive knowledge. That's more of like an intuitive sense of what is truth. So for the person in the family who is the questioner or the problem child or the identified patient, they serve a role in the family. And just like in our lives, when we create chaos or we create a problem, right? We fixate on a problem, right? There's a problem, and I'll work on my other issue as soon as this problem is addressed, as soon as problem is resolved. Well, the problem serves a purpose. The problem, we have decided, because everything is a decision on some level, we've decided that problem serves us. So we are wedded to holding on to that problem, the energy of that problem, because it serves us in some way. And a lot of times it helps to delay having to deal with deeper, darker issues, like really delving into the subconscious soul work in our lives, right? In astrology, they talk about the North Node. The North Node is where you're supposed to go in your life, the things that you're supposed to do, the challenges you're supposed to embrace for yourself, the hard work of doing things that are scary and that you're fearful of and that really challenge you and push you, right? That's the North Node. And in astrology, there's something also called the South Node, right? That's everything that comes easy to you. That's everything you did in your last life that you already know how to do and comes quite easily to you and not a challenge at all, right? A lot of us stay in that South Node area for our lives. We don't really push ourselves to go into the North Node. We kind of say, I'll just stay here where things are easier, where I'm good at these things. These things come easily to me. Similar to that, when we fixate on challenges that we help create, chaos, bad relationships, what have you, breakups, things of this nature, it creates a certain drama, right? And that drama feeds on itself, and we become wedded almost to that drama because that drama allows us not to focus on other things. And sometimes our whole lives are caught up in these little dramas, right, that we create for ourselves. And these little dramas, they serve a purpose, and we allow them to occur. We encourage people in our lives who bring these dramas to our lives, because we sometimes don't want to do that North Node work, if you will. We don't want to do the things that require us to risk and be uncomfortable. We don't want to, maybe not consciously, but we don't want to have to challenge ourselves and be challenged and have hard work to do that puts us outside of our comfort zone. We very much want to stay in our comfort zone. The thing about the middle child, or the child who ends up being the rebel or the bad kid or what have you, is that kid serves a purpose. So in a sense, we become dependent upon them, and maybe sometimes we help foster that child having those problems. You know, maybe we could have assisted that child not having those problems at some point in the family's development, but to some degree, that child, when we focus on them, then we don't have to focus on ourselves. We don't have to focus on our own brokenness or our own growth, right? So it gives us something to focus on. The point that I want to make with that is that in the subconscious landscape of the family, if the human being can be spread out to be made bigger, and we think about the family as being kind of like a larger human being, like who's the head and who's the arms and who's the legs and so forth, someone in that family then is going to help act out the subconscious, what's going on underneath in the family that we don't really want to talk about or address. It could be that there was a childhood molestation that no one talks about. It's a family secret. It could be that our father cheated on our mother, but no one wants to ever address that question, and whether it was something that was damaging to our other parent. It could be that our mother never really loved our father, but they stayed together out of safety or security. I think a lot of times people stay in unhealthy relationships, but it's from a place of fear. So really interesting to look at is what purpose does that person serve? And sometimes they are acting out. It's like a pressure cooker, and there's so much heat and there's so much things that are festering under the surface. That person really serves the purpose of breathing, letting air out of that cooking, right? The cooking of the family's cooking, right? They're the barometer, right? So you know how the family's doing sometimes by that person. They serve a purpose in that. If you're working with a family, like as a therapist and so forth, that person lets you know what's going on in the family. So where it gets interesting is that when that person comes to the family, and that's where I left off in the last video, when that person comes to the family and says, no, I've done some work and now I'm ready to do me, and I'm no longer willing to be that person in the family who's the scapegoat. I'm no longer willing to be the focus and the fuck up child. Everyone's going to have to own their own shit here, right? I talked about in the previous video about how that's what they were saying that they wanted all along, right? In every family therapy session at rehab, at this expensive rehab where money is power, and oftentimes money can be a form of attack in terms of saying, well, we spent so much money on you, a lot of weight, a lot of pressure and guilt, so all the money that was spent on that individual is another weight on that individual's back to carry. It's a very hard situation to be in. But the person who has all that weight, right? Let's say they come and they're ready to not be the identified patient anymore, and they're ready to break away from that and say, I'm going to claim my own life here and live my own life for me. I'm not going to live my own life for you guys anymore. I'm not going to be defined by this random family that I've been born into. I'm just not interested. My soul wants more. My soul needs more in this lifetime. So the person comes to the family and says this, and you would think like, well, the family would be supportive, right? And it's the same thing with our friends. Let's say you get clean and sober, your friend has not stopped drinking yet, and you tell your friend like, oh, I'm clean and sober, I've been really working it. And maybe your friend is not as excited. Maybe your friend is not as elated. And I think that can sometimes hit us really hard, right? That we're like, well, I just don't get it. Like, you guys said you wanted me to get clean and sober, or you said that you wanted me to get healthy. I just don't get it. But what you'll often find is the people within that circle, they will then start to become like in your family, they will start to exhibit unhealthy characteristics, right? Now that they're not focused on you as the identified patient, they will then start to own some of their own shit, and like maybe they realize that they're not happy in their marriage. So sometimes like after someone gets clean and sober and has achieved that for a significant amount of time, you'll see like the parents that were always unified around that child, sometimes like they'll get a divorce or something. And people are always on the outside like perplexed by that, like, wow, I thought they were such a strong family. Like, I wonder why they got divorced. And really, when you think about it psychologically, well, maybe they would have gotten divorced sooner if they hadn't been united around the identified patient. And sometimes the identified patient, that tends to be the middle child, but it could be another child within the family, they subconsciously recognize, like, oh, I don't want my parents to break up. I'm going to become the fuck up child because that will keep my family kind of united, and there won't be room for other people to have problems. Like, I'll bear that cross, if you will. It's not always a conscious, there's not like a 16-year-old that says, I'm going to go to the mental ward because it's going to keep my parents together. And I know that my siblings need that, and it'll help my mom not be financially destitute. Oftentimes women economically can suffer after a divorce and so forth. So it's not that it's always a conscious decision. It's not that someone says, I'm going to become this just so that my mother doesn't suffer financially until 4 years from now when I finally am tired of being the identified patient and say, I'm ready for a different role. I'm no longer going to be this role. It's just fascinating to look at that. So that whole concept of the identified patient who gets well, but who also, one, is the barometer for the family and shows you how the family is doing. Like, it's the temperature gauge, that tells you how the family is doing. But they also can carry something for the family. Like, they carry the burden of unhealthiness for the family. They kind of say, I'll throw myself on a sacrificial fire. I'll be the identified patient, and for the foreseeable future, you guys can all focus on me. You don't need to focus on yourselves. You don't need to focus on dad's alcoholism. Like, I'll bear the brunt of all this. You don't need to focus on mom's depression or your unhappy marriage or my sister's mental health issues. You don't need to focus on any of that. Just everyone focus on me. I'll destroy my life, for the foreseeable future, and everyone can worry and kvetch about me, but that provides something for the family. And sometimes the person is also torn apart, I think, potentially by the concept of the whole idea that I referred to earlier about truth and lies, that sometimes people become troubled who are very acutely observant of discrepancies between what we live and what we say and what we do and what we think. A lot of people, this is not on their radar. They don't pay attention to, you say you're happy, but I observe you and you don't appear to be happy. Or you say this is truth, but really that's not true. We don't really breed or cultivate a sense of deeper examination sometimes of our lives, and discrepancies between what is real and what is false, and what is illusion and what is truth. And we don't always embrace truth. We don't always embrace our deep soul truth. So I think that can also lead to those perhaps middle children, but not always, having deeper questions about life, because maybe the oldest child wasn't provided the opportunity to examine things on that level. Maybe there was so much pressure to be something, right? Whatever the parent wanted, we want to create these mini me's. So whatever the parent wanted is usually whatever that oldest child will seek to be socially accepted and approved of and validated by the parents. That's very important for the oldest child. The middle child sees that the older child was already validated by the parents, so typically the middle child feels relatively safe in embracing other concepts, and maybe in that respect they're the ones who are more likely to observe discrepancies in human nature and society at large, and also within the family, in terms of what I spoke to earlier, which is truth and non-truth, and lies and non-lies. And if you've been raised with this concept of this is truth and this is not a truth, then I think it can trouble you as you get older and you see injustice. And you see injustice in these very subtle ways, in the ways that we interact with one another and the ways that we treat one another, and what we value and what we don't. So we might say we don't value X, but the child who's more observant, who's prone to observe discrepancy, they might observe that indeed the parents do value X, and maybe they don't even have the words to address that with the parent, or there isn't the space or the relationship to address that. They would lose closeness or intimacy or even love. Sometimes love can be conditional, and so the child may fear bringing that to the parent's attention and really addressing it with the parent. Or they may observe this all on a subconscious level, and so they may act it out in other ways, but really the deeper complexity is that they're deeply troubled by the parents living fake lives, parents pretending to be happy but not, parents worshiping money and materialism but being truly unhappy and not being willing to be honest with themselves about it. So often you see young people grappling with this, because I think what comes up for them is that they finally realize that there's a choice. There's a choice in that they can live a fake life. They can live a life of fakeness, or they can live a life of truth. And truth may require that they are not as close with their family, or they may lose friends or resources. They may lose support. And I think their souls grapple with that. We call it the coming of age, but I think it's so much bigger than that, because I think it comes down to this society feels incredibly false to me. I want to be an authentic human being. I want to be alive, and I want to speak truth and have truth spoken to me. And I don't want to have lies preached at me. I don't want politicians to lie to me. I don't want the television to lie to me. I don't want the businessman to lie to me. I don't want my parents to lie to me. I want to have relationships of truth, and I don't want to sell my soul in the process of growing up. I don't want to believe that indeed it's required, that I kind of compartmentalize what parts of my soul are going to be truthful and honest at this point in my life. I want to believe that all of me can make it through this period of coming of age. I want to believe that there's a place in this world for me, and that I will be supported in telling the truth, because that's what you told me my whole life, right? You raised me as a child telling me the world is beautiful, the world has beauty in it, and that it's a safe place, and that I will be safe in this world. And I think it's a hard reality check when you have that point of awareness, when you realize the world may not be safe. The world may not be safe, and the world may not be telling the truth, and people that are supposed to tell the truth may not be telling the truth. And a sheep may look like a sheep, and a lie may look like the truth, and it's all very confusing, and there are subtle shades of gray, and I think it can be very disconcerting to kind of come to terms with I wasn't told the truth about the world that I will be facing. I was kind of told an illusion. It's like I was sold a TV show version of the truth, but then this is not the truth, right? I'm seeing now fully. I'm truly seeing, and I was told lies. And I don't know that we always consciously can talk about what that means, because we don't always have the verbiage as a young person, but we feel it, right? We feel it, and it breaks our hearts, right? Because we were told one thing, and then we fully wake up to the world as it is, and maybe we see the people that we've loved the most, that we see them fully, right? We see them not as perfect beings. We see them as imperfect beings. We accept that our parents are struggling with their own self-actualization. We see that our parents are struggling with their own false truths that they've told themselves, their own lies that they've told themselves. So it's a very difficult period to grapple with those truths, and we may not even be able to articulate it clearly. So this whole concept of when we change, this is one of my favorite topics. Let's say we've always been called Anne, and we say, I want to be called Brian, right? When we change, that can be very scary to other people. And the reason is, like the ant analogy, is that we influence one another. We influence one another by our actions, by our body language, by our movements, by our fashion, by our speech, by our food choices, by what we consider honorable, by what we consider ethical. We can normalize all kinds of strange behavior. We're adapting so quickly, and we're evolving so quickly as a human society. But in terms of what we teach each other by example what should be valued, and we teach each other by example what matters and what truth is and what's worthy of honoring and so forth. Um, we get really comfortable with our friends or our family members staying in their little box, right? So this is how it relates to the identified patient in the family fuck up. So the family fuck up is in the box of the black sheep of the family, right? Every time you go to the family gathering, the family reunion or whatever, they say, "Oh, how's Johnny? Is he out of rehab, or is he, drinking again, or is he off the wagon or whatever?" Right? And it's something to focus on, right? It's something in the family to focus on, like, "Oh man, Johnny, yeah, what we're never gonna be able to fix Johnny." Like, there are these stories, stories that we tell ourselves in our families and our communities and so forth. So what happens when Johnny gets clean and sober and, I don't know, becomes a drug and alcohol counselor or something, is no longer interested in playing that role, right? That people can congregate around and talk about and discuss over appetizers, right? What if Johnny says, "I'm going to take my soul back from this whole equation. I'm going to take my good name back from this equation. I'm no longer interested in being your appetizer discussion person. I'm going to, do me." It really alters the landscape of the family, like I discussed before, where other people then start to have problems because there's like so much energy and focus on that one person, and then it just kind of dissipates. It changes. The energy kind of evaporates or moves around. Other people in the family then start to have to work on getting better and so forth, because there's no longer that identified patient that's kind of taking on, manifesting the undercurrent of the family, the sadness, the darkness of the family. They are no longer bearing that role. They're no longer throwing themselves on that sacrificial pyre and so forth. The same thing goes with our friends and people in our relationships as adults, is that let's say religion becomes more important to you, and you go to your non-religious friends and you say, similar to what I mentioned a moment ago, if you want to go from Anne to Brian, and you say, "I've changed, I've changed, and you can change at any time. You can also not change, but I'm changing, and this is who I am, and I'd like to reintroduce myself to you. I trust you and I love you, and I would hope that you would accept me in my new form. But I'm like a caterpillar, right? Like I'm moving and growing here, right?" So it's fascinating to me to observe what happens when you do that. It's like a chemical equation, right? You go to your friends, you go to your family, you go to your boyfriend, your girlfriend, and you say, "I'm not interested in going out and drinking. I'm, not drinking alcohol anymore." Or, "I'm not interested in having discussions about that kind of thing anymore," or trash talking people. I think it's really low energy. I don't have any interest in talking badly about people without their permission and without them here. That's really low energy and just feels terrible. I just have absolutely no interest. So sometimes people bond around gossip, and so it's really important if you're changing like that and you make that distinction, people can feel judged, right? So they might feel like, "Hey, why are you acting like you're such a, you're better than other people, or you're acting sanctimonious and stuck up, and I really don't like you anymore." So you might experience being ostracized in some respect, or then being criticized or talked badly about yourself. But what's really fascinating is, if you're coming from a really, beautiful spot of your own transformation, where you are growing up and you're saying, "I'm not going to live the same life over and over and over again and call it a life. I'm not going to live the same year over and over and over and call it a life. I'm really going to grow and change in this world and get to know different aspects of who I am and explore who I am." And I would often talk to people about falling in love, and I truly believe our biggest work is falling in love with ourselves, right? And it's not egotistical. It's some of the most beautiful work we can do in this life, and the same way we would do with a lover that we love so much, in terms of, or a child, we would stroke their cheek or kiss their brow, or stroke their hair, or give them a hug, or a lover, we would just kiss with so much passion and so much just desire. um, first, our first work is to really get to know ourselves and really love ourselves. And I think it's a terrible thing. It's just so terrible that our culture teaches us that self-love is bad, when I would say no, self-love is good, 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 right? Self-love is some examples of self-love. Self-love is when your auntie offers you cake and you're not eating refined sugar, you're not eating this crap, you know how it makes you feel, you know it's not good for you, and you're just not eating this, you have the ability to say, oh, okay, I love you and I'll eat this cake to show my love for you. But it feels like poison to your body, and so you're not really interested in eating that cake, right? It's not about entitlement. It's not about people that eat organic and have the money to eat organic. And in this moment, just for the sake of argument, it's about you're not eating this garbage. You don't want to eat refined sugar. You know that it's like crack and you don't want to eat it, and you know what it does to your brain, and you know how bad sugar is for you, or white flour or what have you, and you absolutely have no interest in eating this food, and everything inside your body is like saying like, no, I'm not going to eat this garbage, right? So someone hands you this, someone you love, and self-love is when you say no. I think we've been taught, especially culturally, that it's appropriate to show appreciation for food that's being given and show honor and honor the people we love by eating that food. In my family, we call it the food police, which is when my dad would have us eat food on our plate that we didn't want to eat, and then we developed eating disorders and got really fat. And he takes that criticism pretty well, but and that probably stemmed from his own maybe lack of food when he was growing up. I'm not sure. Really hard to get over food and eating disorder kind of issues, but the point that I'm making with that is that when we eat food that we don't want to eat or that doesn't feel good for us, that's not really a loving action towards our bodies. Oftentimes there's a disconnect, where you're like, it's almost like when you have sex with someone and you don't really love them or you don't really feel a connection with them. You might like kind of check out. And so sex abuse survivors sometimes talk about that, where they'll have a sexual experience, but they're just kind of like above the bed, floating above the bed somewhere. They're checked out, right? You're checked out. And the same thing with food. You can be eating but not really like maybe the TV's on, or just you're not really in the moment. You're not really aware of what are you putting into your body and feeling it go down into you and assimilating the nutrients and then expelling it after you've digested the good food the good nutrients you want, and expelling it. Like, you're not really in touch with that whole process. But to love yourself is to really see food as medicine and really see like, I'm healing myself. This is a food that feels good for me. I feel like my brain is getting lubricated by the oils of this food. Like, really being aware of like that food is good, and that I love my body and I want good food for my body, and that's not a selfish thing. And I think sometimes we have some guilt around entitlement that eating well or wanting to eat well is kind of a snobby upper class thing, and I don't think it needs to be that way. If you look at indigenous people all around the world, they weren't eating refined garbage from Nestle and what have you. This is corporate America or corporate business, which has created this horrifying epidemic of obesity and cancer and diabetes with populations that traditionally native populations that didn't eat this garbage, right? So I think it's kind of bullshit to say that the organic food movement is an economic issue. The reason that I say that is that it's an economic issue today, but it historically wasn't an economic issue. People were not using pesticides and herbicides, when they were growing corn here on this continent. There was organic food here before colonization. So I would say the original peoples of this country were eating organic. And so I don't believe organic has to be this concept of entitlement. It's only been maybe an issue of entitlement as far as good food, in terms of the way that we see it today, maybe for the last like 300-400 years in this country. Um, So self-love can look different for different people, but a lot of times it has to do with boundaries, and a lot of times it has to do with doing our own healing work and prioritizing that healing work. So we might have pressure from friends to hang out with them and be there for them. But we might realize, like, when we check in with ourselves, like, oh, I really don't have the energy for that right now. For those of us who are introverted, we really need that time to recharge and recharge our batteries, and whether it's contemplation or meditation or reading or just napping or walking in nature or going on a little trip. I think as you mature and you get older, you recognize like there's a lot of things that take our energy that can leave us feeling empty and depleted. So part of that work, I think, is really being aware of we have limited energy. We have 24 hours in a day, and we need maybe 8 to 10 hours of sleep. So limited energy and limited time to really take care of ourselves. If you think about it this way, God gave you this beautiful gift, which is a life and this vessel that your soul is in. So you have this beautiful opportunity to show God appreciation for this beautiful opportunity to be here, to be alive, that you're lucky to be here and you're lucky to be alive. So what better way to show appreciation for that than to take good care of the vehicle that you've been given? And so people do that in a myriad of ways. Maybe they do yoga, or they swim, or drink really good water, really high quality water, or spend enough time in nature, or unplug from the television or from the internet, and just learn to protect themselves. I think a lot about what self-love is about protecting yourself. It can be protecting yourself from poisonous circumstances, poisonous environments, poisonous people that have a lot of just residual anger, or things of that nature that kind of bleed out, people that are looking for drama or looking to fight and quarrel about things that are unnecessary. A lot of times I find people want to have discussions about things that aren't that important to me personally. They might want to debate something. I had a recent circumstance where someone wanted to debate organic food versus non-organic food. I used to work at an organic farm, and I have a childhood friend and her husband who are organic farmers. I've also observed the people that I've noticed who eat organic food and people who eat non-organic food, maybe for the last 20 years, and I don't really need to read a lot of research studies on this. Like, my time is limited in this world, and I don't have a lot of time to devote to proving other people wrong. That's not really something that I want to put a lot of my energy into. And I think in the male Western kind of white civilization impression that we have here in this world as of right now, there's a lot of I'll prove you wrong. I've got a study, I've got a great research study, and I'll show it to you, and that will prove to you that you're wrong and I'm right. Well, studies can be biased, and studies can have ulterior motives of their own. Sometimes studies will be associated with a company that makes money off of whatever the study proves or doesn't prove. I think ultimately there are those who find comfort in that and who really desire to have studies prove their viewpoint right, and they're very concerned with right versus wrong. Again, back to that truth versus non-truth, which can sometimes be a subjective thing. But I think ultimately some of the most important work we can do is what's important to us, right? I know for me, it's not important for me to know that organic food has been proven more healthy or not healthy. Like in my limited life that I have on this earth, I don't plan on getting involved in lots of discussions around my way versus your way. That's not really where I want to spend a lot of my energy in my life. And it's very taxing to explain yourself to other people. I truly believe you can live by example. You can show people by example and show people that there are different ways to ask the questions. There are different ways to interact with the questions. You know, sometimes we get so caught up in these traditional ways of communication and traditional ways of seeing one another and seeing what's possible that we don't even really truly see anything. We miss everything, in my view. So I tend to avoid those types of people, not because I don't believe in studies and so forth, but because I don't necessarily find that those people are very happy and healthy people in general. Though the type of person who is consumed with empirical data and WikiLeaks or Snopes and things of this nature tend to be very stuck people on average, is my opinion, or has been my observation. And so what I find is when I get kind of pulled into these debates with them is that I have to take a step back and I have to say, who is this serving? Who's being served by this debate? And how am I feeling? Where is my energy level in this conversation? And if my energy level is really low, then I know that I don't really care if I win or don't win. I just want out of the conversation, because for me, that's just a red flag. Like, these conversations are debilitating and they really drag you down, and you're warring with people that you care about stupid things that if they want to research or they want to explore it on their own, if they want to explore the idea that maybe some things are not in a study and you have to figure it out for yourself, that's their spiritual work, or that's their work in their own intellectual exploration in this life, and that's their responsibility. So I think a lot of times we can heal others by teaching them how to heal themselves. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of healers, they will keep giving away their fruit, even if their roots are diseased, right? They just tax themselves out. They think that that's good healing, right? To be a good healer means you just give and give and give. I strongly disagree. I think that's a terrible healer, in my opinion. A terrible healer. I think a good healer is someone who models how to take care of themselves. And that means doing your work on your childhood. That means exploring your subconscious motives. That means really looking at who you're hanging around and if they're really raising your energy and if they're good people that challenge you. And hopefully your friends do challenge you, but hopefully your friends challenge you in ways that really raise you to a higher level, you know, that ask hard questions, but not fighting questions, not like let's debate this or publicly humiliate you. Like those aren't good friend dialogues to be having. So when we change, we give other people the permission to change, and some people don't want the permission to change. It scares them to be given the permission to change. They become very threatened by that. So let's say you change and you say, oh, I know I used to gossip, but I've decided I just am not interested in gossiping anymore. I'm not going to engage in gossip, and if you gossip, I'm going to leave, and I'm probably not going to hang around with you that much anymore because I just don't want to be around it. It's very low energy, right? People might call you sanctimonious. They might think that you're being an asshole or judgmental, something like this. What's difficult is when we are so caught up in others' acceptance of us that we let that define our existence. We let our own happiness be dictated by whether or not we are considered socially acceptable or palatable to others. So we base our moral fabric or we base our lives, in essence, we define or design our lives based upon thinking like, how will people perceive this? Like, will I be perceived in a positive or negative way? I think it's a slave system. We are caught up in a slave system because we We care so much about what others think, even our friends. We care so much about what they think that we let them define and dictate who we are. It's very sad. So ultimately, the coolest thing I think about discovering who you are and learning to fall in love with yourself is really learning to like yourself. Like really learning, like, wow, I'm a really good person. I really love myself. I'm a really good person. And it took me a long time to get there, right? I hated myself for so many years. Like, this is awesome. I really love myself. So you don't have to walk around with like a mirror saying I'm so awesome, right? But you also like are proud. Like, I've really worked on myself, and I feel good about myself. And so I think there's a lot of weird shame in our society about that. Like, oh, you sound so egotistical. But I think everyone should love themselves. I think we should teach children, really love yourself. I think we really focus on teaching children to love others, but ultimately we can't love anyone until we love ourselves. And I think that's the real problem, is that most people actually aren't capable of love because they don't truly love themselves. And when I talk about truly love yourself, I mean like really, really love yourself. Like, you could spend hours and hours and hours, not like stroking yourself like, oh, I'm so wonderful, I'm so wonderful, but you're really okay with yourself, with all of your own issues and all of your own challenges and annoying qualities and stuckness and stubbornness and foolhardiness. And I mean, I think you need to be able to laugh at yourself like constantly. I ran for the bus a couple weeks ago, and I really did a face plant right into some bushes. It was awesome, like right in front of everyone. It was just beautiful. I couldn't have designed it better. And I was laughing so hard. And like, for me, that's like the perfect example, is like, I was embarrassed, but like there was also a part of me that was like, this is hilarious. Like, because I think I was like taking myself kind of seriously in that moment. And I think I was, posing a little bit maybe with I had my purse or something, and just to do a face plant, like, for people who know me, like, they know that that's kind of typical of me, that I am clumsy and will embarrass myself publicly in ways that are just that are purely me. Like, I don't think anyone can embarrass themselves publicly like I can. And so I think becoming friends with yourself means you learn to love that part of yourself that's the idiot, the part of yourself that's the child, and that's the fool, right? That we all get to know the fool within us. So anyway, and so when we change and we come to those friendships, right, where maybe we've always been the passive one in the friendship and the other person has always been the more assertive one, or they've been the leader and we've been the follower, and we change and we say, I'm maturing or something. My life is different. I'm a different person. I've shed some skin. I've gone through a cathartic process, and I feel like different things matter to me. Life feels different, and I really need you to accept me. I need you to embrace this new me. Like, that would be deeply meaningful to me. Like, please, be there for me as my friend or my lover. Like, please accept this new me, right? Everyone has a right to say, I don't really like the new you, and I don't want to be like your friend or your lover. If you go back to your old you, then fine. But there's a part of that that's very fascinating to me, which says, I'm threatened by you changing. I'm threatened by you changing because that makes me think that I might change, and I'm not ready to change. I'm not ready to change my ways. It startles me. It shakes me up, because everyone is in a box. I mean, let's really be honest with ourselves. Everyone is in a box, right? So I have everyone in their little box, right? Where I say, oh, this person is like this, and I probably could expect them to go this way or this way by like 3 points on either side, but they're in that box, right? I pretty much know what kind of person they are, and I know what they're capable of or not capable of, and the kind of conversations I would have with them. They're in a box, right? So everyone is in a box. And we put each other in these boxes, and we accept being put into these boxes. And I think a lot of times that's what labels are about, is that we take on we take on the label and we let the label become us. We become it. We get defined by these labels and we say, okay, thanks for the label, and I'll stick it on my lapel and I'll be this because you've given me this label, and it's okay. It's not that bad of a label. I don't mind it. I don't mind this box you stuck me in. It's okay. I can make it a home. I can set it up and, put up some wallpaper. But what happens when we just have an epiphany someday and we say, I really don't want to be in this box anymore. I'm really tired of being in this box. I really want to be a completely different person. I have no interest in being in this box anymore. What's heartbreaking is when we go to our friends and we say, please accept me. I am changing and I need your acceptance. I need your love and I need you to value me. Because I want you to value me for my soul. I want you to love me for my soul and not for this box that I'm in. I want you to see the real me, my soul imprint, if you will, and not make me have to succumb to only being able to grow in these very small ways the rest of my life. I need to grow in some big ways. I need to stretch and grow and become something completely different. I desperately need you to accept and to love me, because I need to believe that you've loved me for who I am, who I truly am, like beyond boxes. I need you to love who I truly am my whole life, like for the rest of my life. And it's just heartbreaking to risk all that and to do all that growth and then have friends that say, I'm not really comfortable with accompanying you on this journey. Like, I see that you are getting all geared up and you want to go into this like dark landscape where there's no light in the dark and distant mountains. And I didn't sign up for that. I said I would party with you down here in the valley, when things are good, but where you're going is not really a place that's comfortable to me. And it frightens me or startles me, or if you change, then I might have to change, or I had you safely and securely in a box, right? And it's similar to that person I mentioned who's in the family who is in a box and then says, I'm going to take out my eraser and erase all the edges of that box. Like, I'm no longer going to be in the box that I've been put in by my family. I'm going to be someone completely different, and you can either accept me or not. They may not always verbalize that. It may be done in a more disastrous fashion, but I think in a lot of respects that's what we do with our families, is we come to them and we say, I need to reintroduce myself. You think you know me, but you don't know me. I'm completely different. I'm a completely different person than you think that you might know. So I'd like to reintroduce myself to you because I've just found a part of myself that I didn't know existed. I am becoming reintroduced to a part of myself that I didn't know existed. I'm discovering a different me that I did not know before. And I'm scared and excited, and it's amazing. And please, help me and accept me in my new skin, right? And so it just can be this type of rejection that really just strikes deep in your soul when the reception is less than supportive. It can be heartbreaking. I mean, I'll just let you know it's been for me a heartbreaking process. I don't think it changes where you feel like you're going and why you feel like you need to go there without really knowing where it is you're going. But it definitely changes that sense of like, who are you with on that journey? Because I think a lot of us kind of come to this realization of like, there's going to be lonely parts of our lives regardless. There's going to be times in your life where you have to understand what you think reality is, and you're going to have to forge on ahead and maybe believe that sense of reality by yourself and be comforted by that sense of reality by yourself. And you're not going to have the security of other people validating that sense of reality for yourself. So you're just going to have to carry on and be brave and keep on going. And then eventually, if you're on those mountain treks, then eventually you'll meet a nomad from Tibet who's also on their little trek, and you guys can hopefully connect over the same reality because you're in the mountains anyway, in this symbolic analogy. So I think, regardless in our lives, we have to journey and sojourn by ourselves. And that's when I think about like World War II and Germany in terms of the Nazi Party and what it means to say I'm not going to be a conformist, and I'm going to, even if it means I'm a party of one, I'm just not going to be a conformist. I have absolutely no interest in being a conformist, even when everyone around you that you love and adore might say, this is truth, and you have to say to yourself, but is it truth to me? Does it resonate to me? How do I feel? What do I think? Right? And if you're becoming reintroduced or introduced for the first time to a part of yourself that you never knew existed, and you realize that a lot of life is bullshit, right? And you realize that a lot of things that you thought were important actually aren't that important, or what is important are things that you haven't really devoted time to that you now want to devote time to. It can change the paradigm for your friends and family, right? They're caught up in the wheel too, right? The slavery wheel of money or power or success or happiness. What we tell each other happiness is, like, whatever. And a lot of times it comes down to if you're really at peace with yourself, you're not going to be threatened by someone you love growing and shifting and changing. I would imagine if you were really at peace with yourself and a self-actualized individual, you would kind of remark almost nonchalantly, like, "Oh wow, you've become a Tibetan Buddhist, great," or you've decided to convert to Islam, great, that you're not that you're loving someone enough to allow them to grow, that you're loving someone enough to allow them to shift and change. It's almost like someone choosing a different gender and saying that's okay, and I'm going to love you, and it's okay if you want to be different. It's okay if you were heterosexual and now you want to be gay. Like, it's okay if you change. It's okay if you grow in this life. You're allowed to change and grow. And I think we get so accustomed to this is who I am and that's who you are, and we don't really allow for people to have epiphanies. We don't really allow for people to have spiritual awakenings where they realize that they want to change their lives, and we don't really support one another in making those dramatic changes. I think we're scared of folks making those dramatic changes because it just shakes up our equilibrium. We're like, no, 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 you can't decide to go to medical school at 45 because that's not a rational decision. Okay, well, why are we so concerned with what's a rational decision? Why are we so wedded to rationality? Like, how has that served us? Do you notice that the people that are most devoted to rationality, do they appear particularly healthy or happy people? I mean, let's just look at that, right? We don't need any studies. We can just look around. Anyone who's really wedded to rationality, I don't know that they're necessarily the type of people that I want to be. I really like artists. I really like creative types. I mean, I certainly have scientist friends and business or political friends, but that doesn't really appeal to me in terms of being so wedded to rationality that I can't be spiritually growing or emotionally growing. And I find it fascinating to do spiritual and emotional growth. There's parts of myself every day that I'm meeting that I'm not friends with. I think when you start to do deep spiritual work and you go into the landscape of your inner subconscious, you find pieces of yourself that are broken, but you also find enemies within, right? So imagine if you're walking in this place inside yourself, like a tundra or something, and you find these people that really are sabotaging aspects of who you are, right? They're sabotaging maybe having intimate relationships. They're sabotaging self-acceptance. They're sabotaging relaxing and happiness. Like, I think sometimes we are able to go into those places and say, and really dialogue with those entities, those people within us, and say, where are you from? Where are you from, and have I been feeding you? And if I've been feeding you, where have I been feeding you from? Like, first off, like, let's cut off that food source. but like, a lot of times for me, it's like, I don't know, it's stupid stuff. It's like competitiveness in my family, well, who started that? And I've, given it a lot of thought. And from one side of my family, it goes back at least 2 generations, and it's really fascinating when you start to do that deeper work with family lineage and inheritance, and different strands of the family inheriting different battles, if you will, or different curses, if you will. It's just fascinating to really dig deep on that stuff, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's fixed. Like sometimes we can kind of burn the end of it, like a hair strand that's a split hair strand, and you can burn it and stop it from splitting. Like sometimes those like generational stuff, the repetitive patterns, you can kind of burn the end, singe the end of that hair and stop it with your generation, stop it with you. But sometimes it could be something that won't get resolved in this life. And I think sometimes those are the harder questions, is to come to a point of peace in our lives around being willing to live with unanswered questions. That's perhaps some of the deepest work we can do in our lives, is to live with mysteries, to live with unanswered questions, and be at peace with those unanswered questions. They may not get answered in this lifetime. Like if you're researching the inner topography of your psyche and you're discovering aspects of yourself, in this analogy, I'm saying you're walking through the tundra and you find, these enemies within, and you ask them, like, where have you come from? Like maybe it came from childhood. Your mother yelled at you, and this person is still walking around in the caverns of your mind, occasionally yelling at you. And so you kind of greet them and say, why are you yelling? Like, why are you still yelling? Because childhood's over. And maybe they give you an answer. Maybe they sit down with you and break bread with you and you have a chat, or maybe you never get an answer out of them in this lifetime, right? Maybe you tell yourself some answer to make yourself feel better. Like oftentimes I think in therapy you might end up, I just don't always have a high opinion of talk therapy, but in therapy sometimes you'll have you'll tell yourself like, oh, well, that was because I was parentified, or I was trying to resolve this issue of feeling less than, or feeling insecure, and that I was considered to be a failure on some level. We find words, I think, sometimes to fill in the spots because we're so desperate to have an answer. We're really a society that's very consumed with answers, right? There's always an answer, right? It's multiple choice question or fill in the answer, but there's always an answer. What's fascinating is when you live with those, I like the term koan, Koan, the Buddhist term of like questions, like what if life's a koan? What if we are meant to live with these questions, these eternal questions within ourselves? And part of the beautiful gift of life is accepting that these questions are meant to stay as questions. They're never meant to be answered. I mean, that's, I think, some of the most beautiful aspects of life. And in this scenario that I'm talking about, where we might go inside of ourselves and find different broken aspects of ourselves and make friends with them, or maybe stay enemies or distant cousins, whatever our relationship is with these fragmented aspects of ourselves within ourselves. The enemies within, sometimes it's okay. Kind of like how parasites are on animals, and it's kind of a reciprocal relationship. Like I think sometimes we're so wedded to the concept of dark versus light. We're so wedded to the concept of evil versus good that we don't understand that within good is evil and within evil is good, and that sometimes it's all gray, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be a simple equation of black versus white. And I think that's sometimes the problem, is that we really see life as having these simple aspects of goodness and simple aspects of not goodness and evil, but we don't really understand that perhaps there are a million other aspects to goodness and badness that don't even get addressed and don't even get attention. And so really maybe it's just a wash and it's all gray. And obviously there are things that are, not okay and that are hurtful in life and that are wrong. But what I'm talking about is the deeper existential questions of why do we believe there are simple answers to complex questions when you really perceive how complicated the universe is and how diverse and complex it is. I think it's important to understand that we are the universe, that we are a universe within ourselves. And within our own universe, we know what complex creatures we are. We know that even if we have a central goodness to us, a central desire for beauty and a desire for love and a desire to be kind and to help each other and to help the planet and the plants and the animals and the children and the old people and the whole human family, but it's such a complex, diverse, magical mystery inside of us. When I think about dreaming and how dreaming is so mysterious, where do we go? Where do we spend a third of our lives? What do we do? My friend, the Inuit elder, talks about us traveling in dream time and visiting our friends in dream time, and who knows where we go, right? We go somewhere, we do something. And it's just fascinating to me because we pretend like we understand what it is we're doing here. Like we pretend like we understand who we are and what's going on in our subconscious and how we're evolving or what we've evolved to at this point. And we pretend like we have a lot of answers. And I think the real wisdom, the real knowledge is saying we don't have the answers. The real knowledge is saying anything is possible. If you rearrange what you perceive to be reality and look at it from a completely different perspective, I think it can be mind-blowing. And I think sometimes the anti-intellectualism within the United States, where people are just so dumbed down and don't really ask harder questions and really kind of want the safety of just pre-programmed existence. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's like just turn on the television and you have this reality that can take up 3 or 4 hours of your day easily. And we teach each other by example, and we live this dumbed down existence. We teach each other that you can really just live this dumbed down existence quite easily and then die. So I think in those moments you don't really understand how deep life can be or how beautifully deep and mysterious it can be because you're not really engaging with it at that level. And so sometimes we really have to change and we have to grow because we have to there's really nothing else to say. Like we have to change and we have to grow because we have to. And so it makes me sad, or I'm sorry when I want to say to somebody, I'm sorry that you don't want to grow. I'm sorry that you feel like you can't grow. I'm sorry that you are stuck or that you feel safe in your own paradigm, in your old paradigm, in your safe pattern of existence. I'm sorry that you feel so wedded to the box that you've been put into, and I'm sorry that you are so you succumb so much to the slavery of building your life on what others think of you and what others say about you and give them that power. And I'm sorry that you are letting your life be defined by these distractions. And I'm sorry that you're not shifting and growing, because I need you to shift and I need you to grow. But you can't force that on people. You can't force them to shift and grow in your timeline and in ways that you perceive, right? You have to let everyone grow and shift in their own time, in their own way, and they may not. And I think that's the hard part, is when you have friends or people that you love and you have to kind of make a choice. You can continue to be friends. You can continue to be, have a partner or a lover who isn't growing. And to some degree, maybe that brings you down and maybe they stop you from growing because you have to kind of go and meet them back where they are and where they feel safe and where they feel safe about having you be. So you kind of have to stay in that spot that they're accustomed to or that they want you to stay in so that they don't feel threatened. And they that life is secure, that things stay the same. But deep down, I think eventually there's something that happens, and I'm still exploring that, which is when someone cannot grow or chooses not to grow, you can end up having a very superficial relationship with them at that point. And I don't even know that you're even able to have that conversation, which is the hard part. It's almost like dementia in a way. When you say to them, not that you really can always, but when you say to them, I don't really see you growing, I don't really see you changing or shifting in your life, I think you could make some hard decisions. You could dig deep and make some hard, tough changes in your life and really push yourself to the max and, really do some emotional growth or some deep healing. And I would love to see that for you. When you want someone to shift and change, and you tell them that their lack of shifting and changing impacts you, there's oftentimes an ego battle that comes up. It's very unfortunate, but the person who feels attacked can say to you, I don't really feel like that's valid to me. It feels like you're being judgmental, and they may feel comfortable in their own growth pattern. And sometimes that's maybe as simple as what people talk about in terms of friends growing apart. I don't always think that it's that simple. I think the people that have come into my life have come into my life for a reason, and that somehow I've known them before, or that they are connected to me. So I'm not really convinced that you grow apart from your friends in that respect. Not for me personally. I've really felt like I stay connected to my friends spiritually, even if we're not connected physically. I feel very connected to my friends, almost like a agreement, like I agreed to love them for this life, and I would like them to have agreed to love me for this life, but maybe they've stopped loving me, and that's more possible for some people than others. It's very interesting to look at individual personalities and how some people, it's not a lack of care or concern, but some people truly can stop loving other people. I don't know that I'm one of those people. I tend to just love people, and I just love them. And even if we grow apart, I still love them. But it's fascinating to me to think about what happens when you grow in opposite directions, because I don't believe it's always that simple. I think sometimes what happens is you're ready to change, and you're ready to change in a big way, and you're ready to change, and even if it means that you're going to be alone in your life, you're okay with that, because you're so ready to be someone different and not be who you were. And the other person is not ready to do that kind of metamorphosis. They're not prepared, or they're just not ready, or they don't want to, or they can't, or perhaps they're just like not at that spot. And I think sometimes it feels like a weight. It's almost like you need someone to flap their wings and fly with you. You cannot carry them, and you need to fly now, and it's urgent. It's like a sense of urgency. So it's a complex issue, but I think ultimately my point is that we change each other, we teach each other, we influence one another, we show one another what's possible, we break each other's minds open, we can be an instigator for other people making leaps above where we've gone. All the time I'll go to see my mentor, and he'll take me to places that I hadn't really thought of, or hadn't really challenged myself about, things I hadn't thought of, spiritual questions or what have you, just blows my mind. But then I'll mention something to him, or a thought I've had, and it seems like he hasn't thought of that idea. So I think ideally we are helping one another. We're sharing, and it's not a competitive thing. It's not a fighting thing. It's not a you're more evolved than I am, but it's how can we share how can we share, and how can we help each other grow? Because ultimately, if you break out of this paradigm that believes that there's only enough food for a certain amount of people. There's only enough resources for a certain amount of people. If you can just break out of that dysfunctional paradigm, there's enough knowledge, there's enough food, there's enough fruit from the, tree of knowledge. There's enough everything for everybody, for everyone in this earth, for children in Africa, for everybody. So if we have the resources and we have the energy sources to really have enough for everybody, then ultimately we can help one another to grow, and we can help one another to change or shift naturally without it being a competitive process. It doesn't have to be a fight about who's right and who's wrong. I think that stems from a lot of that competitiveness around that there's limited resources. There's not limited resources. There's enough abundance for everybody. We just need to learn how to create that and make it available for everybody. But once you have it in your mentality that you have a certain level of satisfaction in life that's guaranteed to you, that's available for everybody, and you're no longer living in a state of thinking that there's limited resources, I think a lot of that natural competitiveness that bleeds into relationships dissipates, so that you can just break open your mind and open your mind to the concept of, how can I help you, and how can you help me, and how can we help each other, and how can we help the world? And it's not about who has the better idea, and it's not about who's the most popular, and it's not about who's this or who's that, and it's not a power struggle. It's not an ego battle. There's no need for that. Like, we're past that. We're past the ego battle. We're past the power battle. We're past this fighting over who's right and who's wrong. That's a complete waste of time. We don't even have to go down that road. And that's where I want to go with my energy when I'm around people that I feel positive about and feel supported by. I truly feel like when I'm in those situations, there isn't a sense of we're on opposing teams, and I think that's the dangerous territory that has been pervasive for so long, is anytime there's conflict, and sometimes when we change and we shift and we grow, that's perceived as conflict, but it's not conflict. It's like a flower that's opened its petals, and you've opened your petals before your friends opened their petals, but maybe they opened their petals before you in the last season of flowers, and you don't have to compare who's opened their petals before the other person. It's irrelevant, right? So in this paradigm, I think we can let a lot of that go, and we can achieve so much more when we're not fostering competitiveness. And I think what this time calls for is a real sense of self-awareness. Where are we cultivating competitiveness in ways that impede our progress as a civilization? Where are we cultivating competitiveness where it's isolating us from one another and we're not growing emotionally? Where are we cultivating competitiveness in ways that are starving our soul of real meaning and real truth in our lives? There's no competitiveness. No one's winning and no one's losing. It's somewhat irrelevant. We're all interconnected. There's really no reason to pit each other against one another. And I think conflict is different than that, in that we can have conflict and disagree, but there's productive conflict. And I think that this particular culture has a real hard time with productive conflict. We tend to be passive aggressive or not address conflict effectively. But I think people who really love themselves are comfortable with conflict, in that they can say, I disagree with you, or I'm hurt by your choices, I'm hurt by your decisions, or the way that you've been treating me is hurtful. And you can share that in ways that are not offensive. There's ways to express those things that are not hurtful. I can say, I've been hurt by you, you've hurt me, in a way that doesn't say, this is a fight. There's no fight. I'm hurt, but there's no fight. And we can express those things. And I think that's a step that we need to take as a civilization, is to really be open to conflict, but not the ego conflict that I was mentioning a moment ago, which is oftentimes the ego conflict stuff comes up with competitiveness, with let me show you I've got it all figured out, and you don't, and I'm judging you. And that's a lot of times people's own perception, their own garbage that they're projecting on the situation. And so sometimes you have to articulate, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you're less than. I'm saying that I feel like I need you to grow. I have different ideas about what that looks like. I tend to be very straightforward with those that are close to me in terms of saying things like, your heart seems very bitter to me. You seem very brokenhearted, and you seem like you are kind of frozen, like your heart's been hurt and it's just kind of frozen. It's in that frozen place for so long now. And I don't know at what point you made some contract with the devil about your heart, but I'm assuming it happened when your heart got broken the first time, and there's just a contract that you signed with the devil that you're never going to love again or what have you. So this is the kind of honest feedback that I give people that I love, and that feels hurtful, I think, at times to some people, but I think it's more honest than, I don't know. I think a lot of people just don't risk. They don't risk saying what they think or what they feel out of that fear of conflict or that competitiveness. They feel like if they give their honest truth to somebody, that person will, that it'll come back and hurt them in some way. So everything becomes sort of a game and political, and you try to figure out how you can get ahead in the game. I think that's the deepest, most unfortunate hell that we've built for ourselves in terms of the hell that I believe in, which is the hell here on this earth, which is when we cater ourselves to be something that we're not, or we stifle our own human spirit because we fear losing power, or we fear hurting others and not gaining in the future, that we want to be always having the option to use people in the future, like for favors and things of this nature. So we never want to offend anybody, because that kind of interaction, which is so pervasive, is really a superficial one. We're really then having very superficial relationships with people, because I think the deeper relationships that we're having with people, we're going to hold them accountable. We're going to say, you're living half a life, you're a workaholic and you seem very unhappy and you eat terrible, and it seems like you have a lot of fat around your belly region. It seems like that's an area that's got some sensitivity, like the solar plexus. It's a very vulnerable spot in terms of talking about body stuff. Like, if we love one another, we can say these kinds of things, right? We can say, your marriage seems really unhappy and I would love to see you happy, right? But because we don't want to offend anybody, we don't say those kinds of things. We keep those things to ourselves, but I believe it stays toxic within us. It's something we keep to ourselves, that toxicness, and then it's something that it's toxic because the relationship becomes so superficial and so fake. If there's only certain things, it's a censored relationship, it's only certain things you're allowed to talk about, then that's not really a true relationship. That's not really an honest relationship. Obviously, there's some people that you're not extremely close with. You don't need to necessarily tell them your belly fat might have to do with your exposed solar plexus, and that's an area that's vulnerable for you and you want to have it padded. Like, obviously, there's some people you wouldn't tell that to because they're not a close friend or someone that you love, close, in your life. So I'll stop there, but thank you so much for listening. It's lovely to talk, even though this did get cut off at the beginning.